Hi everyone, this is Omer Yusuf, Advisory Solution Consultant for the IT Asset Management Business Unit at ServiceNow. Today we're going to talk about software licensing and change projection. Now, did you know that ServiceNow sees over 36,000 changes that occur on our ITSM product on the platform? So that's incident management, change management, problem management. And that change volume takes place every hour. Now, there's a very good chance that at least some of those 36,000 changes that we're seeing are going to impact servers or workstations or computer CIs in general that have software installed on them. Now, why is that important? As you may be aware, a lot of software is licensed not just based on the number of installations that a discovery system or discovery tool finds, but based on the underlying compute of that physical or virtual hardware on which that software resides. So what does that mean? For example, let's look at the operating system on a server, Windows Server. Windows Server is licensed based on the number of processor cores that are powering that server, be it physical or virtual, right? And there are certain rules that Microsoft has on how many minimum licenses for cores are required for every physical or virtual server based on the number of processors on that box, physically or virtually. Now, let's say the change on that server, let's say a server goes through a change where you need to increase the number of processors to make it support a heavier workload. So for example, let's say a web server that's surfacing up a web page requires additional capacity based on peak usage, certain times of the day that require a little bit more processing power. If that change was to be made on a platform like ServiceNow, you're going to go through your traditional change management processes that are going to require approvals from perhaps the team that manages the infrastructure, obviously the team that manages the application that is supported by the infrastructure, which in this case would be a website. It may have some other stakeholders that opine on that. Now, a best practice for software asset management teams within the IT asset management world has always been to have a software asset manager, software asset analyst engaged in that approval process. Now, how do you ensure that you equip those software asset managers with the right information at the right time to be able to make decisions on the impacts of that change? Traditionally, that has been challenging, especially if you look at systems that are disconnected. So let's say that change management process, let's say it is happening on ServiceNow. If your software asset management system of record or your software asset management product or tool is not integrated or joined at the hip with your incident and change management process, it becomes extremely challenging, if not impossible, to automate the process. So how do you automate that? How do you ensure that if your systems are residing on separate platforms, how do you ensure that those updates are happening quickly enough so that you're catching those changes? Well, the short answer to it is that it's next to impossible. The number of resources that you're going to require, both the people resources as well as the technical resources to create those integrations and to manage that integration, is likely going to cost you more than having both products reside on the same platform, and on the same platform that is connected through a single data model, a single architecture, so that that data can be shared between tables within the CMDB to be able to surface the relevant information to you at the right time. So let's walk through an example. Let's say we have a server that sits in a cluster, right? And that server, and let's go back to the original example we had, was supporting a website. Right? So there's a physical server that supports that application. That physical server has 2 virtual machines on it. And from a licensing perspective, let's say you own 100 cores of licenses to support that environment, right? And you're using 98 of those. So from a license compliance perspective, today, as things stand, you're spending $1.5 million on licensing and you're compliant. Now let's take that example where you have an application manager that says, hey, I need to add some capacity to this server. I need to up the number of processors on this physical server because I need to improve performance because I see a lot of people hitting the website and we're struggling to support that. So a change ticket is opened, right? So typical change management process, a change ticket is open and a level 1 technician, let's say in this example, let's say Patrick, gets that change. right? So now Patrick has seen a change for 6 to 12 processors on the server. And so he needs to go and add some compute to the server. The application manager or the project that's, let's say, managing this change has said, okay, we're going to budget for the physical 6 additional processor cost, plus obviously the cost of internal change, the cost of time for the technicians, and so on, right? They factor all these costs in. But what if this proposed change involves software licensing that is governed by the number of processors or the number of cores on that server? So again, the example being Windows Server. What is that going to mean to the cost of software licensing, which quite often, as you could imagine, outweighs or outshines or trumps the cost of physical servers changes, as well as the cost of services changes, so the individuals responsible for those changes. Software licensing tends to trump all of that. So it's extremely important to catch that change. So let's see what happens when we add those 6 cores or 6 processors to this server. Well, straight away, we're seeing that the number of writes that are used by that server from a software licensing perspective are going to increase. And given the cost per processor, which is how this particular product is licensed, you're now seeing an uptick of nearly 6 figures that was not accounted for. And this is for one piece of software that's sitting on the server that gets impacted, right? You can multiply that out. For example, Windows Server is just the base operating system. Well, what about the number of database servers that are connected to this environment? Or even the database server application that might be installed on the same physical server. So you need somewhere to store all the customer records or the data that's associated to this web server. Well, let's say they have Microsoft SQL Server. That's also licensed on a per core basis. What about Oracle Database or IBM WebSphere? Again, these products are licensed based on the underlying compute, and each of those software publishers have their own rules for licensing based on those core metrics. If these changes were made on the ServiceNow platform, and you also have the ServiceNow software asset management product installed on that same platform, because of that common architecture and data model, and the data that gets shared, and the licensing rules that we have within the product, we're able to surface back those impacts to you as a change practitioner or to any stakeholder that's responsible or part of that change approval process so that you can catch the changes before they happen. More often than not, the cost of change will multiply if you don't catch it on time. What do I mean by that? Let's say you were to get audited as an organization by Microsoft or Oracle or IBM down the road, and they catch that you are using more cores or more compute than you're licensed for. There's a very good chance that you're not going to pay $96,000 to fix that compliance gap. There's a good chance that you're going to pay that plus some penalties, right? So the cost avoidance here is not just the numbers in red that you're seeing on the screen. It could be multiples of that. Sometimes publishers can even go back and charge you backdated maintenance and software support for the period of time from when the change was made to the time that they catch that change. In some other cases, they may even charge you penalties that include backdated interest payments. So again, very important to catch these changes as they happen. So let's recap. Some of the outcomes that we're trying to achieve as software asset management practitioners is to have predictability of changes that impact software licensing posture, to be informed through workflow when those changes are taking place, and of course, to remain in compliance so that we can avoid penalties as well as unpredicted software licensing costs. Now let's see what this looks like in a live example within the ServiceNow platform. We're going to start here within the ServiceNow software asset management product, specifically the software asset workspace. We're on the software asset overview module of the workspace. Let's go into the license usage module, which is on the left-hand side, and let's look and stick to that Microsoft example. So we're going to look for the Microsoft Publisher card. We're going to pin that to the top because this is something that I look at quite often. Going into the Microsoft Publisher card, I get a view for all of the licensable products that I have installed in my environment with their license compliance postures. Let's go down to Windows Server, which is where we wanted to look at a specific server that's going to go through a change. I want to look for Windows Server 2012 R2 Standard. Clicking on that specific product will give me details about the licensing that I own today, the licenses that are required, and any gaps that I may have. In this case, I don't have any gaps for this specific software model. Let's go into the number of licenses that are being consumed or that are required. And let's specifically look at server WS21. So that's the server right here assigned to TED, which is consuming 32 cores of licensing for Windows Server 2012 R2 standard. If I click into the server, first and foremost, what it's going to do is it's going to give me a description of how Microsoft, in their terms, describe a per core license metric. So this explains what a core licensing metric is in great depth. Also, if I scroll down, it will give me any minimum licensing rules that need to be applied. Now, in this case, this is a virtual machine, and the rule states that there have to be a minimum number of cores applied to each processor or each virtual processor attributed to that server. In this case, that's 8. So because I have 4 virtual processors against this Windows server, I need 8 times 4 or 32 cores of licensing, which is where you're seeing this number here. Now, if I didn't factor in that minimum rule, I might have just assumed that I have 4 server processors and I have 4 cores per processor, so I only need 16 cores of licensing. So the very first thing the SAM product is going to do is it's going to ensure that you're utilizing all of the rules available to you from that publisher. And this information is available for all the publishers that we support via publisher packs in the product to give you the right number of licensing that you require for that CI. So now that we've established that this 4 processor, 4 core server doesn't require 16, but requires 32 licensable cores because of the minimum rules, let's now take this server along for a change to see how the cost of change is going to include software licensing. Again, the requirement here is that you're using the ServiceNow Software Asset Management product, which is what we're looking at now, on the same platform, the same instance, that you have your incident and change management, which is part of our ITSM capabilities. Let's go into the All Navigator and type in change. So we're going to submit or create a new change request. I'm going to look at all of the available change models that I have. Just for sake of time, I'm just going to pick an emergency change. So let's look for that configuration item. So I'm going to look for server. That's the server right here. Let's just say we're going to assign this change to the hardware group. Put in the short description. Need to add compute to the server. Let's say loan management website is seeing low performance, so we need to add additional processor power to the server to accommodate. Very simple. I'm going to save this change, and now once that change is saved, we're going to go to the very bottom, right, which is where we can see that configuration item that we entered earlier. We're going to right click on that and we're going to click on propose change. And here I can see the original compute for that server. So if you remember, it had 4 CPUs and 4 cores, right, per CPU. Let's say we're going to update this now to 8, right? So we need 8 physical processors on the server. And let's just say each of these new processors now are not quad core, but let's say they're octa core, right? So let's say they're 8. So we're really adding performance to the server. Now let's go ahead and save that proposed change. And now that we've done that, let's go ahead and request approval. Right, now that we've requested approval, we are told immediately that a proposed change that we've made may change software licensing costs and that a change projection has now been initiated. Okay, so this happens automatically because the system recognizes that there is software that is on this server that may be impacted by the type of change that we've made. Now, scrolling down in the same view here, you'll see the license change projection tab gets exposed once you've submitted the request for change. And you'll see here the true cost of that change from a software licensing perspective. So you can see the current spend was about $100,000 in software licensing. The projected spend has now gone up over 4x based on the changes that were made to the server CI by adding processor cores to that server. So we're equipping practitioners both on the software and IT asset management side, but also on the change management side, as well as the application owners and other stakeholders that would be either responsible for the underlying application or the service that is seeing a change, or the financials associated to the cost of infrastructure and software as a whole. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video and learned a couple things about how ServiceNow's ITSM and software asset management indeed do work better together. The data that's being populated in this table is coming to us from our software model table, which is where you're tracking as a software asset management practitioner the software license entitlements that are entitling you to the software that's installed on these servers. The financials associated to the licenses that you've purchased coming in either through a procurement system, through your software publisher or your software resellers on a recurring basis, or through integration. Thanks again. Have a great day.